Hi guys, so we are gonna start. So this is DMM. Sorry, this is Madinas. Sorry, wrong thing. Yeah, no, wrong time zone, I guess. So this is Madinas. We are gonna get started. So for people on site, I'm gonna pass by this just as a reminder that you have to sign in using the tool.
It's coming. So yes, please pass around the blue sheet and log into the QR code so that we can log in your attendance, if you don't mind.
Yeah, should be the same. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get started. So this is the note well. You should be familiar with that, but please take your time if you are not to read it. And this is the note really well. So please take also attention to it, pay attention to that. Get familiar. You have the slides on posted, so you need more time to read this. Please do so. And these are some tips for the meeting, if depending if you are in person or you are remote. So you remember that you have to sign in using the tool. If you are on site, you can use the kind of light version tool. If you are remote, you will be using probably the full version, and that will already record your attendance. But it's important that you basically record that you are here for many different purposes. Among them, one of them is basically to know how many people are here to dimension also the rooms for future meetings. You have the agenda, you have the meeting information. Well, this I guess probably you are already familiar, even though we're on the first day. And let's go to the agenda. So we have a pretty interesting agenda, I would say, this meeting. So we'll get going with the final reminders of the share slides. Then we'll have a short summary on the MACA randomization current state of affairs document, the status and potential future steps. Then we will move to the use cases and problem statement document, which is the second charter item that we have on our agenda. Then we'll have a summary of the status of IEEE 2.11 related activities by Mark. Then we'll go into some WBA Open Roaming Wireless Federation presentation by Bruno. And then we'll switch to some conclusions from some experimental tests with Open Roaming that Warren did. And then we'll move to open discussion and future next steps. Any agenda bashing? Any comments? Yes, we have Tim Winters as scribe. Sorry, thanks for reminding that, and thanks Tim for helping us with the notes. And regarding working group status update, we have 3 items that we are chartered to do. We have the MAC address anonymization current state of affairs that will have a short summary just after this. It's almost ready for working group last call. We will see what remains to be done and what we would like to get to working group last call. Then we have the use cases and identity requirements. This is almost complete. And we'll have also a presentation today by Jerome on this point. And then the last charter item is the best current practices regarding RCM. And we'll have a discussion on this during the next steps point of the agenda. And then we also have the liaison on open roaming. Maybe you can comment on this.
Yeah, well, the liaison from Open Roaming, we sent it out on the mailing list, and it was pointing to a draft, but we'll have Bruno presenting the draft. So I guess we can defer the discussion by the time Bruno presents.
Okay, so then we can move to the next point in the agenda. So let me go through that. So I guess this works. So this is Carlos Bernardo's co-author of this document on behalf of my other co-authors, Juan Carlos and Amelia. So this is a randomized and changing MAC address document. Uh, just a summary of the goals and the scope of this document. Well, we know privacy is a concern, and this trigger, among other things, the randomization of layer 2 addresses. And the goal of this document is basically to document what are the different efforts at different SDOs and also by mobile operating system vendors regarding how to randomize MAC addresses and how they do it, and what are the different uh, efforts regarding this. So this is the kind of high level goal of the document. This is a table of contents. Is being pretty stable for a couple of iterations of the document. We have the terminology, introduction, then we have the background on what is a MAC address, what is MAC address randomization, different activities that were performed in the past, like experiments in past IETF meeting and IEEE 02.11 meetings. Then we have a summary of activities in IEEE, WBA, and IETF. And then we have a section on or trying to document OS practices regarding MAC address randomization. We had a discussion in the past how to do this, since this is a part of the document that can be alive. So we I need to move it on the GitHub. So basically, it's a pointer to the GitHub where we can keep this uh, content dynamic if needed. Then we have a taxonomy of MAC address selection policies with different policies, and that's basically the content of the document. Sorry. Regarding the taxonomies, this is the list that we have currently in the draft. So you can see that there are different behaviors depending on what the operating system may do, what the device may do. Per UE MAC addresses, per device MAC addresses. For example, when uh, uh, you generate a random MAC address when you boot, and you keep using that for the lifetime of the device. You can do that per boot. So you generate a MAC address that is different every time you boot a device. You can do that per network. So on each of the networks that you may join, you will be using a different randomized MAC address. And well, there are other policies that try to document all potential behaviors of a device regarding how to randomize and how to use MAC addresses. Then we have the section on the current OS practices. This is the current snapshot. We probably need to do a check whether something has changed since the versions that we documented there in Android and iOS. I will not go into the details because we have only 5 minutes for this point in the agenda, but these are the different behaviors of Android and iOS. And also we tested other OSs, not necessarily mobile, desktop, like Linux and Windows 10. And we also tried to basically document what they were doing on the different versions that we tested. As I mentioned, if we realize that there are things that need to be updated, we can do it because this is basically hosted at our GitHub repository. And this is changelog, the different things that we have done from the very first adopted version until the current one. And just to finalize, regarding next steps, we believe the document is ready, but we will really appreciate to have additional reviews from you guys, working group participants, but also from the WBA, IEEE, and OS vendors. We believe that additional reviews will help us in finalizing the document and then go to working group last call. And that's it from my side.
Thanks, Carlos. So, as a reminder, this is one of the first items in the Charter of Madinas, and the purpose is really just to inform. There's no recommendation in this document, so we are just saying what is happening, what are the observed behaviors on the field with different operating systems regarding MAC address randomization, and that's pretty much it. So we have not got into the recommendations. That's probably going to be part of the last part of the discussion after we hear all the speakers. But with that in mind, it'll be useful to understand your views about the usefulness of this document. It's been pretty steady for a while, so I think we can go ahead. Can you put your name on the queue? No, where you just click on the raise hand on the Meetico, and then please join.
Then you can go to the. Oh, then I can go. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Daniel Borges with Apple. You mentioned you test iOS and you test another non-mobile platform. Do you guys test other like Mac OS and other OSs like that as well? Or do you see that in your previous testing, if you've done any, that iOS and Mac OS are pretty much the same, so you don't do extensive tests on Mac OS?
No, basically we didn't do it because we focused on the mobile OSs, but I think it's useful to do also tests on Mac OS. So if you can, I mean, if you or anybody can help us in providing some type of analysis on that, that would be very much appreciated. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we know that's a moving target because there are features changing in every OS, every release. So that's why we decided to put that part in Git outside the main document, so the document can be published and then still point to that Git that can be updated. Okay. All right. So I guess any volunteer to review the document or give us some comments, or we think it's ready for working group last call? Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes. But we're not very.
So, I mean, I think that it's been fairly stable for a while. So, sorry, Warren Kamari. So I don't know if you want to like ask the room if they think it's close for working group last call, because I think many people have read it, or at least I hope many people have read it. Just a thought.
Right. Okay. Okay, fair enough. So we have not done it for a while, but sure. I do see that we have about 60 people on the connected, but just a few here in the room. So what would be the best way to get okay. Give us 1 second. So we're going to run a quick show of hands. Those that believe that the document is ready for working group last call. And the poll is up. So please raise your hand on the Meetico. We're going to give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, but it's still moving. Okay. Yes. Okay, fair enough. So pretty good consensus. We have 21 that raised their hand, 3 that didn't. So I think that's pretty good consensus. Thank you very much, Carlos. Yeah, so we'll move to the next presenter, who's Jerome. Do you want to propose or share your slides from your side?
Can you share from your side? Can you share from your side? All right, beautiful. Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. Welcome to San Francisco. This is the use case document, the second document we've been working on for now, what is it, 3 years? Next slide, please. As you remember, we started that work in the idea that we are missing some contextual definition about what exactly we're trying to solve, what use cases we're working with, and also what are the different scenarios that we need to address. So this document has been ongoing since we had quite a rich set of updates, as you can see here. We are today in update 6, which is I would say not minor, but not a major update compared to V5. where essentially on the list we received a few comments telling us that we're missing the IPv6 side of the house. We have the IPv4 covered, in definition of problems and services, especially DHCP and alike. But we are missing the IPv6 equivalent. So we added to that document the parallel in v6 that we had in v4. And of course, in the addition to DHCP, we have a SLAC that was added. So you have the latest version that is available for people to review if you think there is still update to be done. One major change that we did, and that's probably something that we'll be discussing further on here, is that in the version 5, we removed a section 7 that was offering a first direction through solutions that we knew were possible. And in the previous meetings, we decided that what should happen was BCP, and that use case should be doing just that, describing use cases. So that was a major change. We kept those section 7 elements in the end of the document for a while until the BCP started to be available at the last release, last face-to-face, and then we removed it. If you go to the next slide, what I think these documents leaves us with is this definition of use cases where we've identified these different environments from home to public Wi-Fi through campus, managed residential, and enterprise. And for each of them, we try to define what is the trust degree, and we know we've been debating a lot what does that mean to be trusting and not trusting, and we have quite a lot of definition and text around that in the document. Also, who is managing the network? And what kind of complexity of network services and advance of network support you expect when you are in these different environments. That part, which is, I think, quite of the core of this document, hasn't been changing for more than a year and a half now. So I think this document is getting to a point where it's also very stable. It's also very stable, but it's also because we think that there will be a BCP that will follow this document. And if you go to the next slide, the mapping we had in the early version of these documents, we're trying to explore directions that could address, the complexity brought by the RCM case in these different services. And we mentioned that for anything public Wi-Fi or hospitality, for example, a solution like open roaming that facilitates automatic onboarding on one side, not needing to have any local view of the real MAC address or the user identity while still guaranteeing that there is some authentication somewhere could be a good direction. Also, we saw that in places like campus and enterprise, things like A2.1x were a good way to ensure authentication beyond the machine and in a place where the user would want to be known so that they could access resources that are specific to some type of users. So that is available too. Of course, in most of these environments, WPA2, WPA3 was seen as probably a good idea as well. And that's where we stop in that document as we were discussing creating a separate document for the BCP use case. I mentioned that things which are not being mentioned in these documents or that I haven't seen yet in the BCP are things that we know exist around Madinas, around the IETF. And in particular, there is a lot of work that is being done at the IEEE on one side, and I know Mark will tell us much more about that, and Carol as well. On one side to make sure that the RCM itself will not create additional difficulties or impossibilities in the Wi-Fi side as well. And it seems to us, author of these documents, that the home, the managed residential, the campus, and the enterprise would be places where RCM appearing, there might be a need for the network or whoever is running the network to be able to re-identify the machine so as to access, to allow the access to the same resources. At the same time, another group, A211BI, is looking into how you improve the privacy of 802.11, and I think, of course, that this is useful everywhere, but in particular, every place where there is the notion of people being easily accessing your communication. That's probably something that could be solved there as well. So, of course, the BCP I've seen that doesn't address those questions. But I think, as we conclude on whether we think this document needs to evolve further, and as we've taken away from this document, this last section, I thought it could be interesting for us to bring back those topics, things we probably want to discuss in this group and how we interact with these external entities. Let me pause there for questions and comments on this document.
Thank you very much, Jerome. So I'm going to put myself in the queue just to ask the first question. So it's interesting. So you're suggesting right now adding also BHBI as possible solutions. I mean, we had already discussed .1x and WPAs 2 and 3, open roaming as possible solutions to the scenarios. I guess we'll hear more details from Mark, not to steal his thunder, but on BH and BI. But I think it's interesting, and that's something that the group has not really considered, how we can use all these solutions right now, and what exactly, if ever we want to recommend something as best practice.
Yes, thank you. And I should note that these two groups haven't finished their work yet, although 11BH, as we'll probably hear, has made a lot of progress. And I think, at the IETF, we need to recognize that the problem space we're solving is not 802.11. And there's probably a component of the solution that needs to happen at those layers. The question is, what do we solve above those layers? Yeah, effectively, it's a question I would like to ask the group. And you see at the bottom, I have a couple of notes, more for myself than anything else. We know, we've discussed in the past, there's probably good practices in how we implement DHCP, v4, v6, or Slack, both on the client and the infrastructure. So those are typically of services that are above the 802.11 layer in my mind. But the BCP doesn't address those yet. But that's typically what the scope of the IETF would be in my mind for this solution.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, Eric Ving, Cisco without any hat here. You basically answered both of my questions, Jerome, here, because I think this draft right now is heavy on Wi-Fi and heavy on the hotspot kind of authenticating the user and kind of forgetting about the issue indeed in Slack app, DHCP, CAM table, and so on. Or even if you go further, and if you use BGP, this EVPN, you're also transferring MAC address right through BGP. So this kind of stuff should also be touched, at least in this document, to be complete.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Fully agree, and they are. And I'm very happy to expand more on those. In the clause 2, we mentioned all these services above, like the routing services, etc., that will be receiving the MAC address, but also that need to scale the MAC address changes. We also mentioned the services that provide an address based on the MAC address, so that's DHCP, etc. But I'm very happy to expand more on that if we need be, knowing that of course our context is use case, not best practices. That's a separate document. But yeah, thank you very much. I agree with you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jerome. We're going to move on and have some discussion after the next presenters. We have a constraint in time for Warren, so I'm going to ask Mark now to come and present. Hi, Mark.
Yeah, okay.
Still not seeing. Are you sharing the slides?
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the right deck to pick.
No.
Sorry.
It's best if you share from the pre-uploaded slides, or we can.
Yeah, but I'm not figuring out which one is the right one. Oh, there we go.
Now we see it.
Yep, I apologize for not being familiar with your systems. Anyway, thanks. Mark Hamilton with CommScope Ruckus. I don't see Carol on the call, which is a little unfortunate because she was going to present a couple of these slides. We'll do the best we can. But a quick update, I did present some of this material back in May. So the first couple of slides will be a bit redundant, but there's some new material after that. Next slide.
You have the control, I think.
Oh, I have the control. Okay, then I have to find it. There we go.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So just a reminder, or for those who weren't here in May, .11 has two projects we've kicked off working on randomizing and changing MAC addresses or in and general privacy issues being enhanced. And one of those is TGBH, which is the randomized and changing MAC addresses program. So this is largely reaction to the fact that devices are randomizing their MAC addresses, and what are the quote unquote damages or the things that are broken in .11 as a result of that we can try to find ways to repair without causing any new privacy issues. We've gone through a fairly long process of developing scoping and listing out what all those issues were that we thought were relevant. And at a very high level, I'll get to this in more detail in a second. We do have a draft 1.0 for that amendment, which has passed the initial working group letter ballot with pretty strong approval. So that's really good progress. TGBI is kind of a second project following behind BH, and it is looking at further issues around privacy and how to protect PPI that's carried in various ways, or various ways devices can be tracked. It's kind of building on top of BH, which, like I said, is sort of the immediate fix to problems that a randomized MAC address caused, and going beyond just randomizing MAC addresses to what other information should be dealt with to help protect that the personal information. So a bit of update on where we are with TGBH. So this was the one that's just a reactive program. We have created a draft 1.0. Roughly the content is around two mechanisms. One is known as the device ID, which is a token, if you will, that's generated by the network and provided to the device so that that device can be recognized going forward once the network has established some understanding of who that device is, or has some context that's connected to that device. If that device leaves the network and comes back, for example, you're using a captive portal at a hotel and you go away for the day, you come back that evening and want to get back onto the portal, it can recognize that this is the same device that came back, even if your device randomizes its MAC address to something new in the meantime. The intent here is that that device ID is not necessarily providing any real information. It might just be garbage to anybody externally. It might even be garbage to the device itself. It's just something that the network understands, and it knows how to connect the device back to the previous state that it had. IRM is sort of the reverse side of it. The device identifies itself to the network. This is done by using a MAC address. So the device picks a MAC address that it's going to use the next time it comes back and lets the network know what that address is before it leaves the network this first time. And again, all of this stuff is carried in a confidential, tunnel so that nobody can be snooping this stuff. So the device with IRM then can say, okay, now that we've established some amount of context between this device and the network, here's the MAC address that I will use the next time I come back, so that the device can leave, can randomize its address and so forth, not be tracked, but come back and provide that pre-agreed upon address the next time it comes back to the network, and the network will recognize it. So kind of two different ways to solve the problem. There are different use cases that feel more applicable to either of them, although I suspect kind of either mechanism could be used for most of the use cases. A lot of this, as mentioned at the bottom, is a mechanism to identify the device when it comes back. But I'll point out there's also some use for recognizing the device as it is coming back before it has actually associated. So we are leveraging a mechanism that came in 802.11az called PASSIN, which allows some pre-association security so that the device can be identified as it's starting to come back to the network. We're still doing pre-association mechanisms, but within a secure context. The status of this is, as I mentioned a second ago, the draft 1.0 was completed at the May meeting and has gone out for a working group letter ballot, and it did get 92% approval, which is very good for a first working group letter ballot. At that point, the draft is considered stable enough to be shared publicly, so that's being worked on. IEEE has put a new process in place, so unfortunately I can't tell you when the document will be available. I did just double check today, and it's not available yet, but it should be very soon. So they're working through their process. One answer is that anybody who's got an IEEE membership, largely almost anybody in the public, can get their hands on the document for a price. But you'll see here I underscored that I think it makes sense for us to try to establish a better liaison relationship between the IETF Madinas group and the IEEE group that's working on this, to see if we can share the draft free of charge to your members. That's something we can work on offline and see if we can sort that out. For the rest of the process, just to give everybody an understanding, it goes through a working group churn of a couple of ballots, and then it goes to what's called SA balloting in the IEEE process. At that point, the draft is usually considered to be pretty stable and ready for implementations to start. The target for that is in March of next year, with final publication expected in Q3. BI, I will try to talk to this as best I can because I don't see Carol here. These are her slides. She's the chair of the BI group. As I mentioned, BI is trying to go beyond what BH has done and go beyond what MAC address randomization can do, and provide privacy around other aspects of the .11 protocol that can be leveraged today, in theory anyway, to track devices or understand who users are. So for example, some of the topics they're discussing are ways to change MAC addresses while associated. Also looking at the complications that are caused by multi-link devices with Wi-Fi 7 coming along, but also looking at other parameters that need to be changed because devices can be tracked by other information that's visible inside of frames, such as things like association ID she listed here, but there are others. Everybody just went away. Can you guys still there? Yes, okay, just to my end, looks like. Okay. As well as protecting reassociation, protecting probe response information. Again, all stuff outside of MAC addresses that can be tracked. So that's kind of the next step work. In terms of its schedule, it does not have a draft yet. It's working on some text right now, trying to glue together. I wouldn't even call it kind of a first draft, but sort of a rough collection of ideas and a rough outline, and send that around for a comment collection within the .11 group and community out of the September meeting. And their final publication is actually kind of early in 26, but it's targeting 2026 at this point for actual publication. And I put some references at the end where you can find some more information at public documents of what the various issues are that are being tracked within both the BI and BH group, as well as a pointer to the timelines.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, so we've been working offline on this liaison to exchange the document. So I guess that's something we will communicate on the list, so that we can share the draft to the Madinas, the 802.11bh draft to Madinas to get some more comments. But yeah, we'll keep working on that liaison. And regarding the content and the identifiers, I guess that's something that we can leave at the end when we have the discussion after hearing Bruno's presentation and Warren's presentation, so that we can move on.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Yep, thanks.
So next in the agenda would be Bruno. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, Juan Carlos, can you guys hear me fine?
Yes. We'll share the slides from here. We hear you and we see you.
Okay, sounds great. Yep, good to see you. So I believe I have control, right, Juan Carlos, or?
No, can you pass control?
Let's just. Okay,
Now you should see.
fantastic. Yeah. This is great. Yes, congratulations on all these tools to IETF team. So I'm impressed on the amount of interactivity you guys have. But yeah, so with that, I would like first of all to thank the chairs, so Carlos and Juan Carlos, for the invitation for the WBA to present at the IETF Madinas group. So today the main objective is really to go over the internet draft that was submitted from myself and also the co-editors Betty Cockrell, Najati Champalat, Mark Grayson, and Sri Gundavelli. The key topic is the WBA Open Roaming Wireless Federation, and is something we have been working on for a while. Hopefully with this draft we can really, open up the technology behind open roaming. So everything was built in a way that can scale based on open standards. So we hope this starts a new era of collaboration between WBA, IETF, and also the industry. But having said this, just a quick word about the WBA for those of you that have not liaised with us in the past. So we have a mission statement around creating wireless convergence and bringing Wi-Fi to just play nicely together with other wireless technologies. So being 5G, but also IoT. So we are a member-driven organization. We have now over 200 members. We have technical work groups, and our focus has always been more on the services side and interoperability, and that's why we have these agreements with many organizations. You also know, I see lots of common members and faces here, but definitely IETF, IEEE, the Wi-Fi Alliance, GSMA, and 3GPP are some of the forums we work with. So with that context, the objective of the federation. So we have been working on offload and roaming since the beginning of the WBA. So we just marked our 20th anniversary, and there were lots of learnings that our members just provided to the different work groups. But in the end, there was a common objective and goal that was to enable an ubiquitous Wi-Fi connectivity where private networks could really use identity provider credentials in a much more scalable way. So really the federation was built to create an open framework. So any players that want to get involved, they would have either a fast, simple way to join. They could build their services and businesses and sustain them over time. So conceptually, on the technical front, we position open roaming as having three main pillars. So one is the federation that is hosted on the cloud. So any player can join and just build their own services, maintain them, and evolve them. We have a cybersecurity service that is using the PKI that again allows the different branches of the layers to for the players to service their customers. And finally, we also needed automation. So the devices that would attach to this federation needed a protocol and standards that were already in the industry, so we didn't have to wait for them. So the draft goes about explaining the architecture. So this is just a representation on how we envision the different parties joining. So there is a terminology that is presented around the NP. So that's everyone in the world virtually providing a Wi-Fi service. So could be an enterprise, could be your city, household, so any Wi-Fi network. Then we have on the right-hand side the identity providers, so the IDPs. Again, these are the owners of a user identity. So if I'm able just to have a loyalty app, if I have a way to provision a user, I should be able to connect the federation and just then use what we call the broker. That's the middle player here that allows both of these INPs and IDPs to join. Then at a very high level, to enable this ubiquitous connectivity, we decided to leverage DNS-based peer discovery, where the identity providers could go autonomously configure some records and just become enabled to go attach to networks globally and also be, discovered. Underpinning all these, I mentioned the PKI, but definitely RADSEC and TLS. It's one of the key things we have applied. So then there are the mutual TLS and also the WBA PKI certificate policy that allows all the players to abide to the same rules. Yeah. So moving forward, I think because this is naturally, an IETF meeting, I'm, happy to share that we can even say that the federation was built on IETF protocols, and I think that was the sentiment of our shares and the members joining. That okay, if we have RFCs that have been available for so long and they have been proving year after year, technology after technology, that they can work, they are reliable, let's make sure we use them. So here you can see some of the most emblematic examples, but if we look into .1x IP-based authentication, so RFC 3579 and RFC 3580, the IP, the usage of end user identifiers based on CUIs, so that's where we can then have also some charging models and the exchange of information, the location with RFC 5580, dynamic peer IDP discovery. So even our membership decided to go and call this DPD, so dynamic peer discovery, and that was quite well received among the industry. And then we applied other things like the NSSEC for IDP discovery as a future evolution, so trying to push the boundary on IETF standards. We already discussed RADSEC secured signaling, but then there are also some significant standards from IEEE that uses INQP, so the 802.11u, of course, pass points. But yeah, this to say that we'll keep exchanging liaison statements on a continuous basis with IETF. So just in these recent years, a few examples were, of course, the Madinas, but also the CAPORT group, RADEX, Dispatch. So there are, several liaison statements back and forth. And definitely if there are alignment opportunities, that's one of the messages we bring here today for the IETF community. Okay, along these lines, what's then important as the definitions and the way we try to leverage ready-to-market technology, reduce innovation cycles, do this tech transfer, was the usage of embedded unique identifiers. So I mentioned the 3 layers, right? So for the PKI, the WBA worked with IANA and IETF reviewers to create a new namespace. So there is a WBA ID now as an official namespace for the radius attribute 126. So this is at the same level as, for instance, a TADI code from the GSMA, and the members are using it really for data exchanges between the parties, but also on the UID of the PKI, the X509 certificates. There is this unique identifier that can be used. Also, the certificate-based roaming. So there is a policy identifier where the WBA PKI leverages our PAN number. So that was another one that is available to those participating. And finally, the roaming consortium OIs, they were registered with the IEEE. And again, the federation members who abide to the rules can reuse them. And this is really something that those that join the federation, they can do it from day one. So moving forward and just going into the 3 layers of the internet draft we submitted. So the cybersecurity service. So this is really important because the PKI is underpinning everything we are doing and allowing this flexibility for the stakeholders to join the federation. We mentioned the RADSEC technology, but also the certificate policy is an active group within the WBA. So this is not carved on stone. So if there are changes, improvements, there is always a possibility to go and look into these policies and evolve them over time. Also very important that all the signaling between the INPs and the IDPs, as well, the federation APIs are secured by with mutual TLS. So all the systems that are managed from the federation standpoint are available. And if you look here into this chart, so we have really these 3 levels. So level 1 is managed by the WBA, so the root CA. The same with the policy ICA, where we instantiate WBA policyoid that then gets distributed over the chain. Starting on level 3, important enough to mention that the issuing ICAs are operated by brokers. So those that want really to have high stakes in the federation, they can sign up and manage their own ecosystems. On level 3, there is the concept of registration authorities. So this is optional, but open roaming brokers can deliver certificates themselves. So they become, the face to those IMPs and IDPs that want to use their existing array or hub or ecosystem broker. And finally, there is the concept of the identities, where a member or a non-member working with a broker could just require a certificate, and they would get either a WBID or a sub-ID. So if I'm, an enterprise working with the broker, I could just get an enterprise.broker ID and still be able to move forward. We are very happy that, in fact, the IETF NOC requested one certificate, and there is an issued certificate to perform some, experiments. And I know that Warren will share some results, and we are very happy to hear, the experiences and work towards resolving them. But this just shows how easy and scalable can be a federation where we are able to work with partners in such a fast way and move things forward. Okay, so then the second very important part of the internet draft is all about the standard closed access groups that really enables enhanced policies and their enforcement. So I mentioned the two RCOIs that were standardized. So one is more focused on the settlement free, the other on the settled. They both follow the same principles. It's just a decision on the business model. So right now, the settled is something that is already available in one of the open roaming releases, but the free one is what is scaling more, because if you think about flagship deployments like Tokyo, they are using this one where they are providing that service to the users. But really, I think, the RFC or the internet draft goes into the details and provides real examples. What I would like to do today is just to share that the octets, of course, the first 3 octets are fixed. These are registered with the IEEE, but then octet 4 and octet 5, there is some flexibility to customize them and apply these policies without, waiting for technology cycles to implement it. So you can see here a few bits examples. I'll not go over all of them, but maybe I will just mention, of course, the level of assurance, where you can decide to have baseline identity proofing or enhanced identity proofing. There is some QoS, ID types. I think this one is very important because of all the policies all over the world with GDPR and others. But you can see that if you choose, for instance, a 0, you would have the baseline ID policy where all the users would remain anonymous. But if you change to 1, you would have a permanent ID to be returned by the IDP. And this is where, some companies might apply their business models. Of course, if an INP requires a permanent ID, I might lose, some of the open roaming IDPs that are always anonymous. But I think that's a very strong message from the federation that scale comes with this approach. So importantly enough is also the way some of those ID type fields were built. So I must do a mention to, of course, to EduRoam. So this is one of the bases of open roaming, a very successful model. And those, learnings we had over these years since 2003 mentioned that it was really complicated to scale any roaming or offload with the existing models. So I can give you one example, like one event like Mobile World Congress, where we had, dozens of mobile operators. There were around 70 codes to configure on a wireless LAN controller because there was no other way to get offload from these parties. So what this does is, okay, there could still be, some clusters of identity providers like governments, hospitality, education, aviation. But if they abide to this framework, they can then decide which type of other clusters they allow into their federation. So this gives, lots of autonomy for those companies just to apply the clusters they want, and then don't have to deal with the identity providers or change of the policies. All these, it's based on the RCOI match. So this is something available in PassPoint if we think from the device to the AP. And there are really no barriers to adopt ArcWise today, other than just applying these configurations. Okay, so then
Bruno,
and the final.
Bruno?
Please.
Sorry, Bruno. Warren will have a time constraint, so we would appreciate if you could speed up a little bit. Thank you.
No, absolutely. So this is, really the final part of the internet draft that is about the legal framework. So this is all, quite scalable, but without the right legal terms, it could not scale. So what is available to all the parties is, a T's and C's approach, where if you join, you agree terms with brokers, so not really the WBA. So again, if you are working with a broker, you can join. So these terms also can be added on top, and players that are really willing to add a few more items, they can do it and evolve this legal framework as the requirements come. All the IDPs that want these additional terms need to present them to the end user. So again, privacy and policy becomes quite important with the legal framework. Then the final slide, it's also important to share the status of open roaming. So I'm happy to share that 6 vendors passed the PlugFest compliance last month. So this is, vendors that are going to be announced. So they are equally equipped to deliver open roaming. We have 7 more vendors that are implementing and doing live customer POCs. But then we also have integrators and hubs deploying over-the-top solutions. Just from the devices standpoint, Juan Carlos, and because of the macro-randomization, PassPoint is commonly available since around 2012, 13. It's compliant, mandatory, but also certification accounts for more than 7,000 deployments. Globally, we are tracking around 3 million hotspots, and there are some growing large-scale deployments, from Tokyo to Dublin to London, where everyone could check and just have real initiatives there. So the next steps and leading up to the discussion, we would be very happy to work with IETF on the results of the experimental systems and any consequential, R&D or investigation improvements we need to make. So we would like to update open roaming with Madina's recommendations, like privacy preservation that is coming on the latest release. A note that open roaming is also evolving. So private 5G seller is already a 3GPP release 19 study item. Headless IoT device onboarding with, for instance, DPD is also one of the key components. So we'll make sure we keep, sending you the updates and latest statements as we make progress with these POCs. But yeah, I think that's mainly the update we had for today, Juan Carlos, and happy to join the discussion after.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Warren, are you in the queue or Joseph? Okay, so we have a couple of minutes for questions. Are there any questions for Bruno, Daniel? Yes, yes, you are.
Daniel Borges with Apple. Thank you, Bruno. Good to see you. And I was actually, it'd make me a little bit happier if I had seen open roaming deployed here at IETF. I hear that there's an experimental network, but it's not really. I don't see an IETF open roaming network. But given that you have taken all these standards and functions from all these different orgs, IEEE, Wi-Fi Alliance, and IETF, I think this would be a great ground to try out this technology and to learn about it, because the open roaming I see there's growing deployments, and I think this is a perfect example, a perfect conference to actually have this deployed.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback, Daniel. So definitely something we would be happy to work with IETF NOC team going forward. Thanks.
Should I provide a...
Yeah, speaking on the camera will not work, right? So just to reply to you, Daniel, this time with my AD8, we have good discussion in the ISG, the steering group, to make this proof of concept experiment, or call it whatever you want, on this IETF meeting, and it was declined. We were no consensus, right? There were some people in favor, there were people against. So times will tell.
Yeah, and as a proponent of the experiment, indeed, I think there it seems to me that there was a lack of understanding from the IESG on the purpose and the objectives of the experiment, because the purpose of the group is to check the privacy preservation on the presence of MAC address randomization and how the network services are continued, etc. But I guess they misunderstood putting the privacy of the users of the IETF at risk as compared to looking at privacy concerns. But let's have that discussion. I want to make sure that we have time for listening to Warren.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lord, everybody's taller than me. There we go. Woohoo. Does it also have a laser? It does. So, wow, I'm not that short. There we go. Audio okay? Great. So, hi everyone. This is some experiences with open roaming. As everyone knows, we were considering doing an experiment on the IETF network where we would enable open roaming. We decided not to do it at this meeting. There we go. But in order to try and understand how it works and make sure that I knew that we could run it if we did have it, I decided I wanted to set it up at home, gain some experience. Bunch of disclaimers. I'm not an open roaming or Medinas expert, just a knock monkey. As I said, I wanted to set this up at home so that I could make sure I know how it worked. So if we did have to troubleshoot, we'd be able to. And these are just my observations. So a reminder from the Medinas Charter, we'll generate a BCP document recommending means to reduce the impact of MAC randomization on documented use cases while ensuring that the privacy achieved with MAC randomization is not compromised. So let's see if it does that. There we go. So this is from a blog post back when the beta of iOS 14 came out, saying that Apple would basically do the per network randomization and possibly also a per period randomization. It seems as though at the moment iOS only does the per network randomization, but potentially they could also do per period as well. Android, very similar. By default, it only does per network randomization, but there is stuff in here where a config bit could be flipped so that it does per period randomization as well. But whatever the case, the way it currently happens, if I go to, for example, Starbucks and join their guest network, what Starbucks gets to see is my MAC address. And if I go to a different Starbucks, same SSID, they see my MAC address. This means that Starbucks knows, this device is a device that showed up at one network, then it showed up another. That's all that they get to see. Dan, question now or later? Sure.
Dan Harkins. I think if you go to developer options, there's a thing to make that even more aggressive.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, with Android at least, you can turn this on through a developer options toggle. It is also part of the handset config, so different handset vendors could be enabling this, themselves just by setting that bit. But yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Whatever the case, generally the network gets to see this is a device which I saw somewhere, and then it's the same device I saw later. This just describes what I set up at home, my Apple phone connecting to this little access point, little microtik thingy, my Radius proxy, and then, open roaming and some identity providers. This is how I configured it. I created a network called Open Roaming Test. I said it was a public free network at my house. Oh, Arquay is not listed. Anyway, I think I actually have that on a further slide. Come on. Sorry, I thought I had there we go. Those Arquays, open roaming settlement free, open roaming paid, and another one. Now I have to go back a whole bunch. Anyway, so I set that up, and then I installed the Cisco Open Roaming app. And when you install it, it by default says, share my email address with open roaming providers. That made me a little twitchy, so I turned it off. And when you do that, it says, unchecking this may limit your ability to connect to open roaming networks, as some networks require an email address to connect you. It's like, okay, fair enough, I'll turn it off for now. I also used my Google identity, and it does the OAuth dance, so that's my identity. While installing the app, it also pops up a thing, privacy policy. I had a brief look at it, but largely what it says is open roaming participants may collect end user PII, including end user MAC. And I was like, don't really care. Most networks would see that anyway. End user IP address, also don't care, right? The end user or access network is the thing that assigns the IP, so whatever. But then also end user EAP identity. And I was like, I don't really know what all's in there. That seems like it might be a little concerning to me. Anyway, I turned this all on, and then I looked at logs on my RadSec proxy. I don't really expect you to be able to see this because it's all small. So here's an individual message. So when my iPhone connected, what it shows up here is my per network MAC, blah, 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 blah. Apple Open Roaming Net. I'm using an Apple device. That makes sense. That's what it connects to. And then the CUI, Chargeable User ID. And as you can see, it's this long number here, and it starts with 0605, blah, 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 ends in 0A0 at Open Roaming Google. Fair enough, I'm using my Google identity. Then I decided I'd see what happens if I connect with an iPad. And different MAC address, fair enough, it's a different device, but it's the same chargeable user identity. So what this means is, if I were to take my iPhone to Starbucks and I take my iPad to Starbucks, they know that it's, the same device that's coming back. A phone came back and an iPad came back. But they also know these are owned by the same person, right? It's the same chargeable user ID. So it's not a level of targeting the device. It's a level of you're exposing the user and the device. Clarification or?
Yes, this is Alan. The COI is intended to be unique per session. It needs to change every session.
It doesn't change.
That's bad.
It is.
That's an implementation choice, and that's bad.
So yeah, I mean, this comes back in the access upset. So this is the same. So I then decided to change the arcways. So let's see if I can actually point at stuff. So the last four octets, I changed the fourth octet. I set but one, which is the PID thing, whether the network would like a permanent ID. And I also turned on the share my email with open roaming partners, which again, I'll say, that's the default when you install the app. I was like, I wonder what happens now. And sure enough, what happens now is now when I connect, Warren's iPhone connects, and it's my same per network ID, sorry, MAC address, but it also shares my email address with the device. When Joe connects, it shows his unique MAC, but also his ID. So if this happens, you can actually tie a device to a MAC, and that seems less than wonderful. And also, it will obviously be the same ID because that's kind of the point. So again, right, the Medinas Charter is a BCP document on a means to reduce the impact of MAC randomization documented use cases while ensuring the privacy achieved with MAC randomization is not compromised. And to me, it seems like this fairly much does sort of violate the privacy or compromise the privacy that MAC randomization gives you, because it uniquely identifies you and your device, which is, I think, substantially worse than just like, it's the same device. I agree it would be good if, actually I'll just flip forward a couple. It would be good if the ID did change if you don't have the same thing, but this is connecting through, which one was this? Connecting using eventually my Google going through auth, and I was like, maybe that's just a mistake with the way Google did this. but here it is with Apple. So if I'm using my Apple thing, it's the exact same chargeable user ID. Looking at the draft Tomas document, which I will say is a really nicely written document, well worth reading, it doesn't seem to say that these are supposed to change, so I don't know. I will note that deleting an ID on a device says this will log you out on all of your devices. So, you delete it on a device. When you reinstall on the device, it seems like maybe it changes, but if you still connect from, two things that talk to that account, it's the same chargeable user ID. Anyway, questions and tomatoes, and I'm expecting some rocks. So,
yeah, this is Alan. Having been involved in some of the original COI discussion, yes, this is probably a failure of the document. The intention is that it is unique per session.
I'm assuming you mean only when it's not sharing the email address, because it obviously okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, otherwise, what happens is the access accept can also contain the username, but whatever. If you have an anonymized CUI, the intent was to change every time. The other thing, looking at this, there is overlap potentially between the supplicant configuration and MAC address randomization, right? There's no real reason for you to give the same randomized MAC to Starbucks. This really should be a property of that SSID configuration. However, when you go to your enterprise, you care really a lot less about MAC address randomization. So this is often a problem of provisioning and configuration, and that's a hard problem to solve.
Thank you.
Who is next? I can't see the thing because
Glenn.
I did not raise my finger, my virtual finger, because I don't have a virtual finger. My name is Clemens. There a brief question here. I know that you also own an Apple Watch, and this is one of those tag-along devices. So you no longer have a singular device, but you have an Apple Watch which follows you onto the same Wi-Fi network or tries to do so. Have you observed any interaction of that tag-along device with the?
No, because I only wear my Apple Watch when I sleep, so it's up in my room locked in a safe. But I could try it later and see what it does.
You did not. Okay.
Yeah.
We could ask any resident Apple person here if the Apple Watch is actually supposed to do that or not.
I can also try it later this evening or something.
Okay. Daniel?
I had a couple of questions. First, you mentioned iOS 14, but were these experiments on iOS 14?
No.
Or these experiments were on iOS like 16 dot something?
iOS 16, what I'm saying is this is in the beta of 14,
okay.
they
So
added the ability
but
that
just to be clear, your tests were conducted on version 16. Okay. Have you conducted anything on 17? The seed is out. The developer seed is out. So I was wondering if...
Actually, nope. But I mean, I believe that this is going to be the same behavior because what happens is it's the IDP which sends back an access accept with stuff.
On the CUI behavior, is it supposed to be unique per session and per device? Is that something that should be called out in the radius spec or in the WBA open roaming spec? I don't know. Where should this be fixed? Is it a radius specification fix, or is it the WBA should mandate that the CUI be randomized across sessions and the devices, and they should probably test for this too, right?
So I mean, I'll point out that at least with the Cisco app, you sign in with either a Apple identifier or a Google identifier. If you click logout, it says logout or turn off open roaming on this device. You will have to log in. Oh, sorry, wrong one. If I do delete, this will delete your account. It will remove your account and all associated data and history. But when you sign in again, it seems to generate a new one. Anyway, he got sidetracked.
So if the radius spec says this, which was your radius implementation?
So I mean,
open radius or something?
What I'm using is RadSec proxy, but this comes back, right? It's an access accept message. That comes back.
It's a Cisco radius server. Okay.
But this comes back from the identity provider. It's not generated by the radius proxy itself, right? The radius proxy just ships it to the identity provider. The identity provider ships back this. So whatever they ship back is what gets shipped back and what shows up in the log. So
I'll have a
that's
final
probably a better
question then,
example.
so I don't hog the mic so much. Did you test any other open roaming profiles? Because I see you use the Cisco app, which generates an open roaming profile.
Nope,
but
I
there
just
is
used the Cisco one because that was what was originally proposed for the experiment. And
because for those, I guess, that don't know, there is a portal, an open roaming portal where you can download single digits at Tokyo.
Yep,
There's like 3 or 4 different profiles you can use. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Mark?
Hi, Mark from Cisco. Yeah, I guess just in terms of what does open roaming say? So we say it should be long-lived if the privacy is set. We don't say what it should be when it's not set. And I guess this is maybe part of the BCP. So if we look at username rewrite and when CUI was formed in terms of class and the use of multiple class attributes and how are those defined? I guess there are no BCP around class, but you're right that we don't say these need to be ephemeral. That's correct.
I mean, I suspect part of this is the implementers probably assume that, chargeable user ID is something so that if a network calls up and was like, who the hell was blah, 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 blah at this time, they did something bad. We need to figure out who they are. There needs to be some way, I'm guessing, so that they can tie that back to who the user was. And if you just make them up randomly and sort of make them properly ephemeral, then you would have to track all of them, and that seems annoying. So I think what it is when a user does the OAuth dance, it generates, at least with this the way it's set up, it generates a CUI then, and keeps using that. Otherwise, we'd have to track all of the ones that's handed out for Bob over the last however long, and that seems tricky. So I'm guessing that's why, but I haven't read the spec for how CUI should be generated, what you expect identity providers to do, etc.
Okay, so this is Alan again. The 4372 says the assertion, the relationship between the user and the CUI should be temporary, long enough to be useful, but not long enough that it can be used to identify the user. Later on, it suggests that it should be for one billing period. The history is that originally the username and authentication in Radius was also used to tie into accounting.
Yep.
Once you have anonymous usernames, you can't do that anymore. So you need some kind of ephemeral identity for that user. And yes, it does have all the problems you say, where too bad you have to track this. And there are various ways to fix this on the server side, but I would suggest that Madinas or Open Roaming or somewhere would suggest, the purpose of the CUI is not to identify a particular user for all time. Yeah. It really should be more random.
And I mean, who knows, maybe after, a month or 24 hours or 5 weeks or some amount of time, it would change. Hopefully it won't change so that it's the same for, multiple devices, because that doesn't really, anyway.
And this is usually a failure of the specs to recommend ways to manage this. Like you can think of ways of, having a secret on the Radius server and hashing the username and the MAC address and whatever, right? So you don't have to track everything, you can derive it. That wasn't done, but it could be done. And this is, ongoing operational issues.
Who's next?
It's me. I put myself in the queue. Sorry, I cannot stand up.
Seems like they should have the queue on this screen as well.
No, I just wanted to reply to some of the comments, and I'm really happy to hear this discussion, because this is precisely what we've been trying to do for the past 6 months when we first proposed the experiment. Just as a recap, we had originally planned to do the full thing and have data tracker become the IDP, and so that we could see all different elements of the network, the exchanges, that we couldn't do because of some issues with data tracker. So then we moved on to just use the NOC as an access network provider, and then allow multiple IDPs. But then we have some stability issues, and then we also wanted to limit to one IDP. So that's what we end up with. at the end, we didn't run the full experiment. This was just a sandbox in your machine. But so far, I'm really happy to see that this is good enough to already show some issues. I would expect that having multiple combinations of IDPs implementations, we may see even more issues. And the purpose of the group here is also to identify if there are any privacy problems that we can document and recommend and solve wherever it's needed in WBA, in IEEE, or in IETF. So someone asked the question, I think it was Daniel, like where do we solve this? And Alan is already suggesting that there's a document that maybe requires more detail. So this is perfect follow-up and outcome of this discussion so far. Joe?
Joe Clark, Cisco. To Daniel's, well, first of all, about the CUI, and I like what Alan said. I don't see if, like, for a billing period, if you really wanted it to be anonymous, give me a unique one each time. You do the bookkeeping. If it's like, there are ways to make it not about the user. Anyway, to Daniel's question, we did try other IDPs. Yesterday, I tried the single digits or passpoint profile. The problem is, and Warren didn't touch on it exactly, it was, I think, at Bruno's the NAPTR record, we weren't able to find out who would authenticate other users or other IDPs.
Yeah, so I think there's actually like a different script. So basically you look up the IDP using like NAPTR records and stuff. And the way that RadSec proxy does that is it calls a shell script to resolve them. You and I had tried to fix that by like futzing with the radius conf. There's a different shell script which automatically, where the shell script itself is just like substitute pub in the middle of 3GPP.
Oh, okay.
And so I was like, that's really obvious. So we can try that again later. We did try and connect. We did try and connect.
And it did give it access
to single digits using your AT&T identity, and it was like, no, go away. So we can try it again, but that's it.
The other thing I want to bring up is in Yokohama, we tried this just to prove we could do it, and we could. So from a Knox standpoint, we're like, yeah, we did it. Eric authenticated with his Samsung device, not using the app, and that was great. And the meeting before that in London, we tried this, and we had one user who got a profile from, I think it was single digits, and he was unable to remove it from his device. So we wanted to be very careful that if we did this experiment, we weren't recommending something that would stick around forever. And that's why we, as Juan Carlos said, we were going to focus on the open roaming app as a means just to see what this would do.
And actually touching on what Joe said, I listed these 3GPP country codes and mobile network codes. And Clemens and I were testing down in the lobby of the hotel. And when the elevators open, we would get all of these people trying to connect to the device. And that's using their like SIM-based, And also a couple of people from Apple open roaming, Samsung open roaming, the bottom thing, which is single digits. But I mean, it was a little surprising that as the elevators would open, we would see all of these identities. And even if we did do it, that the access accept thing would change. These identities are based on the SIM. So those will always tie the SIM in the phone to the device. So it doesn't matter if you change your MAC address every 30 seconds, if you're using this, it's always this device. Like I may see it, your SIM is going to show up. So that kind of de-anonymizes all of the, or maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully they change. Are you going to tell me they change?
Yeah. So sorry, it's Mark. Just on that specific question. Yeah, there's IMSI privacy now added to the EAP exchange, so it's now hashed. So it will change.
So hang on. So
it should be changing with IMSI privacy.
Okay, so those hashes that's a hash that changes. It's not just a hash and will stay the same. Sweet. Okay, well that helps.
It's Clemens again. This time I found my virtual finger. So if the problem seems to be implementation related, like I hear, like somebody just did not implement it right. But given the fact that this is this is advertisers' wet dreams, like not only having a device ID, but having a person ID. This is pure gold to certain people. This is real money if the implementation is bad. So how can we, as the standardization body or whoever is involved, how can we prevent bad players from doing bad implementations and then prevent them from rolling this out worldwide?
I mean, I'll point out that the anonymous thing is not the default. When I say anonymous, an ID that's not your email is not the default. And open roaming, if you try and turn on the anonymous mode, is like a bunch of networks won't connect you. So it's clear that like networks do want this sort of information. Obviously, you know, and that's true if you go to some captive portals as well. Like before you can join at many airports, they want your real ID because, as you say, advertisers want this sort of information.
Oh, they'd kill for it.
Yep. So, I mean, I don't know if you can. It seems like this is kind of baked into part of the business model, at least, is you give us your information and we give you the internet.
I understand that it's a policy, but how do we think about enforcing the policy? Like, do we kick out bad players, and how is that working? Or who tests this? Who retests this? And to make sure that that the standard remains to be followed.
So this is Alan again. On exactly that point, people have been doing this for well over a decade. You walk into retail stores, they will track you. It's not even advertising. It's where do you go in the store and what you do. It's absolutely been done for a decade. This is, I would say, partly as an implementer and spec author, this is only partly the fault of the implementers. The specs have to describe the best thing to do. And if they don't, as with CUI, people go, I'll take a shortcut, right? Why not?
Yeah.
The specs allow it.
Yeah,
So you have to write all this stuff down.
Yeah, I don't think the spec says anything about, and the implication is that it's supposed to be a chargeable user ID that identifies the user, and it doesn't say change it real fast, yo.
But it implies that the intention was for that, but it doesn't say how to do it. And the result is people go, you know what, that's too hard, as opposed to, and here's how you do it, and here's why. Right? This is one thing which has changed in the last 5 or 6 years. In all the specs I review and write, you gotta write all that down.
I mean, it seems reasonable that you could say, for every time you send back an access accept, you have to make up a new ID and you have to track which user that ties to so that you can.
Well, good news is Radex just restarted, so you can throw more crap in there and we'll get it fixed.
Great.
Thank you.
Daniel? The reason I asked about testing multiple profiles is I was wondering if this behavior has been observed with other IDPs, because the Cisco Apple tests you, I guess, with the Google IDP or with Apple. But then if you install the Tokyo one, now you're testing the Tokyo IDP. So I'm wondering if all IDPs have the same CUI behavior, or again, it's a Radius implementation that they've picked up, and that Radius implementation shows this behavior, but there may be other identity providers that are doing the right thing.
I mean, I believe we could test this without even having to install the profiles, because we could just like ship messages at the IDPs and being like, hey, here's a, like, you don't even have to install the profile. We can just synthetically generate a Radius request and be like, will you let in this ID, and see if they send back the same ID each time. I would assume that they all reuse the same. But again, I think that there's sort of, at least based upon the wording and things, it implies that that one. I don't know which one. There we go. I mean, the whole, like, this implies that you're expected to share an identity.
But not every deployment.
Yeah,
Remember, there's the PID.
Yeah,
the PID is used for this purpose. The PID says that if you need to give your identity for you to join this network, and that's a policy. And well, for good or bad, that's the policy that I guess WBA put in the ARCOI definition. So if some venues require the PID, your information in order to give you access, that's now if you're finding misbehavior with that bit set or unset, then I see that's another problem. And finally, about the testing and stuff, I mean, something may be correct in the specification, or maybe it needs to be worded different so people understand it. I'm wondering who's doing the verification for this stuff, because it's one thing to put it in the spec. Another thing is who's going to verify all these IDPs are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to point fingers, or maybe I am. Is WBA doing the testing to verify that these IDPs are doing the right thing? I figure if you're going to be an IDP for open roaming, you need to go through some sort of checks and balances.
Yeah.
So you should be tested.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody's violating a spec here, because I don't think the spec says thou shalt make up a new one. If that's the intent, it should probably say that, but it doesn't seem to. Yep.
Can we let Bruno reply to that comment, or
that'd be cool.
Can you take it?
So Bruno, is Bruno in the queue?
Yeah, we close the queue, but I guess he has a right to reply. And so, Bruno, do you want to jump in and respond to Daniel? No, we cannot hear you. You have to put your mic. Sorry.
No, very quickly. So yeah, definitely. So the federation at the high level, there are policies in place where the brokers will, police their identities. So there is a troubleshooting and reporting mechanism. We can be agile, disconnecting a party from a federation. But I think, I just put here on the chat a few ideas where we could work with IETF, because to be honest, I think I mentioned to Warren, I was impressed with the speed he managed to set up an open roaming network. So as any fast evolving technology, some players might do it fast, but not, going over all the bits and bytes of the standard. But Warren was validated by a broker, right? So these brokers, they sign agreements with the WBA. So there are SLAs, there are contracts, and it's a legal, contract that they need to abide to. So if someone is not behaving according to the spec or the standard, there is a legal, implication with that. So that's the first layer. The second layer, as I mentioned, is because we control the PKI, CA, and policy ICA, there is a revocation mechanism where those IDPs or IMPs can be disconnected from the federation. So those processes are already in place. But maybe what I suggest is that on the Plugfest to execute, those coming new and learning how to deploy and becoming brokers, we will keep, making those requirements even more strict based on the industry feedback. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 more minutes, and we would like to at least do a quick next steps. So Mark.
Yeah, so very quickly, in terms of PII, yes, the AMP is going to see it. Warren showed you some terms about collecting PII, the use of PII just from the open roaming legal framework. These are immutable terms. You can use PII to operate the service, to comply with applicable law, and for troubleshooting. You can't sell, lease, rent that PII to a third party. So just to be clear, yes, PII is observed, but you can't exploit that PII. Thank you.
Thanks. Eric?
Eric Vink, responsibility for this. Just to thank everyone in the room, because Warren, you make a big experiment, and the discussion after was quite useful. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 more minutes, and I would like to make sure that we have some next steps. We won't have time to decide and fix the world in 2 minutes, but seems to me that this, well, we can give it a shot. No, seriously, I think it's worth continuing this discussion, and we don't need to wait until the next IETF. We can probably call an interim meeting in about a month or something, where we continue the discussion and see after we have slept on this discussions, what is the best way forward to solve these issues. I think it's great that we have all the systems expertise and views here. So the fact that we're collaborating makes it the best place, I believe, at the moment, Madinas, to reconvene, and then we have the experts from WBA, 802, and IETF attending. So I guess we can send it on the list, but with the intention to call for an interim call in about a month or so. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for the live discussion, and see you soon.
Thanks.
stable client side integrating of it.